work for Boston Teacher Residency within the Boston Public Schools and Teaching Learning Alliance. So I work a lot in classrooms, coaching and focusing on literacy and really trying to keep up with the research and the practice and paying attention to student growth. So today, what we're going to do is take a journey on rethinking small group work, like unlocking language to accelerate student literacy. So the goal is to talk about, like, we're being inundated with research findings and with the Common Core and complex text, and how do we make sense of that as educators on the ground? So I've been trying to take in a lot of the research and putting it into practice, and I'm sharing what my findings have been, and I'm sharing some tips and some ideas with you today. So the goal today is basically, as an educator, how do we identify language structures and text that become barriers for students when they're trying to navigate and make sense of the meaning in increasingly complex text? The second one is, how do we make shifts? Like, I was very heavy into strategy teaching and level text, and everything was about teaching kids to get main idea and stop and think and infer. How do we shift our thinking a little bit and do different practices and make a shift so that we can unlock the things that are really the big barricades for kids to make growth? And the last one is, what are ways we can build the content we need in order to do this kind of work in a different way? So I'm going to share some of those resources and ideas of how you can do that with your colleagues. I think it's really important, before we get down to like what the practice looks like, it's what's the research behind it. So that way, if the practice breaks down, you can go back to the research. And one of the big people who influenced me, I was very heavy into, I really still believe in those things, and I'll tell you later where they fit in. I was very heavy into like strategy teaching, where I put kids into groups that needed main idea or stop and think or infer, and we would have a text that was like almost, it was like instructional level. And then I was really heavy into, guided reading and some book club novel stuff. And there's a place for that, and I'll talk about it. But what I noticed is, a lot of my students that were level 3 or 4 ELL students that were born in this country were not really moving as fast as I wanted them to move. And a lot of the kids we would do complex text in a lot of classrooms, and I felt like we had to over scaffold and like support kids so heavily. And I started to think back to when there was this practice called modified guided reading. And back in the day, you would take a text that was like 3 or 4 levels higher than your second language learners, and you would read it to them, you would read it together, and then the third round, it would be guided reading. I noticed that the students would really, really move in their ability to read more complex text. So basically what happened is I went to Unbounded Ed's conference, and I met this researcher, and she presented, called Dr. Lily Wong Fillmore. I'm going to tell you some of her big ideas that have really stuck with me, and why I'm using more complex text with kids who really know the code, and why I'm doing less explicit strategy teaching and more of this work evolving a different way. So what Lily Wong Fillmore said was basically, like, academic language, if the Common Core is pushing us to do a lot more complex text, then we're going to have a lot more academic language. And academic language has a lot of structures, conventions, and forms that are like a foreign language to most kids. So this idea that they're just going to be able to know these things and be able to understand them and comprehend text with all these complexity of language, we have to really think about that. So she said that, like, some of the instructional supports we should be doing is stopping and having conversations about the language that is hard for kids to input and understand, and really start to name some of the structures and really unpack what these language structures mean, how you're going to gain meaning from those complex phrases, and the kids are going to learn a lot about the language and make meaning of the text through the conversations. And then the last thing, the big goal she had, and it reminded me a lot about the Isabel Beck work, was she was like, the goal is for kids or students in general to have attention to language as a habit. So if I see like a phrase and the way it's structured in the form, I'm going to stop and I'm going to try to unpack it and make sense of it, because now I have an awareness of it. Isabel Beck did that with vocabulary. The big beginning part was to have an awareness of words so that you could stop and want to make sense of it. So we want to position students if we're doing all these complex texts in the a lot of the standards in Common Core say that students have to read grade level complex text, how do we get them ready to do that? So this is her work, and her work really resonated with me, and you'll see how in practice I've shifted my small group instruction to have some of these elements. So the chapter, and now I get to see where you're all from. I see New York, I see Massachusetts, New Hampshire so far. So hello, everyone. So what we're going to look at now is there's two practices that live in education right now. They give kids opportunities to, when you have a complex text, you're pulling out a phrase of the text that is really, really important to the whole meaning of the text. And if the kids don't understand it, then that's going to be difficult. And it's worthy to talk about because it has a language structure that kids are going to come up against over and over and over again. And it might be a barrier, and you want them to be aware of it and understand how it works. So in these practices, one is called language dives. That lives in the EL curriculum, if anyone does the EL curriculum around the country. And the other one is a juicy sentence, which came from Lily Wong Fillmore. And they're kind of like an instructional activity, like there's ways to do it. And what you do is you basically you deconstruct. You'll see the teacher guiding students through, here's the sentence that we're kind of blocked in and we don't really understand the meaning. So you start breaking it down and discussing it step by step. And then like you name the language structure and what it's doing inside the meaning of the sentence. Then you reconstruct it. Students like put the sentence back together, make sense how it works, and talk about it. And then there's a practice time where they actually take the language structure they learned and they put it in their own sentence so they can learn how to use the structure of the language and comprehend it. So what we're going to do is watch a video of the language dive to get an idea of like, what do these practices look like in action? And how can we take some of these practices and use them in our small group instruction and shift some of the way that we do our small group instruction to really break down barriers for kids so that they excel faster?